Hello YouTube. In this video, I'm going to address probably the number one thing that stops theists from accepting many of the arguments that are put forth by atheists. It's this mental block that theists have, which they find difficult to get over. And I would understand and I would sort of sympathize because, as you all know, I once upon a time did accept Christian doctrine as the truth. I got a lot of messages on my previous video that the only reason why I can't see that a God exists is because I don't have faith. And that's what many believers say. That's what I was told when I was about to leave the Christian church, was that I didn't have enough faith in God, and that he will show himself eventually, or maybe that he was testing me, and that I just needed to prove myself. So where do I begin? Well, where do I usually begin? That's right, most of you probably know the format of my videos by now, and you will know that one of my perhaps strongest and one of my personal favorites is to reverse engineer the theist's own argument to show them its flaws. In this particular example, a Christian was the one that proposed to me that I did not have enough faith in the Judeo-Christian God, and if I accepted that God was real and that Jesus died on the cross for my sins, then I would see the evidence that I was so looking for. Well, alright. I will say that, well, why don't you accept that Allah exists? Maybe if you saw that Allah was real, if you truly accepted that, and you accepted that Muhammad was a real prophet, and that he really truly was the prophet of Allah, the only one true God, then maybe you might get the evidence you're looking for. There are two things a theist can do at this point. One is they can concede the point, which they rarely do. Second would be that they can try and show that their God and Allah cannot be compared to each other, which is what I usually see. The most common answer I get at this point is something along the lines of, well, in Islam, it is based on works, whereas Christianity is not. Or, in Christianity, it is God reaching to man, whereas in Islam, it is man reaching to God. Or something like that. And that shows that they have missed the point of the comparison entirely. The point of these comparisons is not to show that these two religions are exactly alike, because I know they're not. They have very different dogmas. They worship different gods. They do different things. The point is to show that both these religions, and every other religion while we're at it, has the exact same basis in terms of empirical evidence to support the validity of its claims, which is none. In essence, the point of that comparison is to show that I don't place any validity in any religion because of the fact that all religions thus far rely on the same type of reasoning. They may be different in terms of dogma, but they use the exact same reasoning to try and justify its validity. And it just does not suffice. So now that we've shown that essentially all religions that have existed or continue to exist essentially use the exact same reasoning to try and justify its claims, why is arguing from faith flawed? Well, first and foremost, it's almost always an appeal to emotion. And, like I always say, the facts should make themselves apparent irrespective of whether or not I want to believe or don't want to believe. Second would be that it is begging the question, meaning that it is circular and relies on presupposition, because you have to already assume that God exists in order to find the evidence that God exists. It is an appeal to ignorance because the person making the claim has felt God and therefore applies that their experience seems to be indicative of reality, whereas that's not necessarily true. This argument also relies on an ad hominem attack because it assumes, without any sort of evidence, that the person who is skeptical of these claims somehow does not want to accept them. Let's not forget what I've proven earlier, being that anyone who tries to attempt to prove that their God exists using that very line of reasoning, while simultaneously rejecting all other gods, is essentially using special pleading because they have not shown proper justification of why their case is an exception compared to everyone else. So how many fallacies is that, and why does it even matter? Well, it matters, at least to me, because if any argument falls afoul under any of these fallacies, let alone all of them, then it shows to me that the argument's validity is greatly decreased, and that unless proven otherwise through empirical evidence, I find it difficult to accept these arguments as anywhere near true. This is why I always set my standard of proof at empirical evidence that can be repeatedly tested, that can be observed and quantified objectively, and can be peer-reviewed and published in scientific literature. Why then did I make this video? After all, if I rely on empirical evidence, I did not provide a shred of empirical evidence in this video to show that a God doesn't exist. Well, I'm not sure if a God exists or not. That's why I will gladly admit that I'm wrong if a God does indeed exist and that the empirical evidence showed that a God existed. Of course, as far as I can tell, my reasoning is more sound than the theist's reasoning in this example, but that reasoning will mean absolutely nothing if the evidence says otherwise. So atheists and theists alike in my audience might be wondering, was this video pointless then? Well, no, because I think that even though logic and reasoning can only get you so far, it is nevertheless a very useful heuristic to tell if a claim is beyond any reasonable doubt valid or not. And in this case, I think I've successfully shown that theists who rely on faith and request that others do so in order to find evidence of their God is not a valid form of proof to suggest that their God exists. Thanks for watching, and may the truth always be heard.